Okay, hello everyone, and what an exciting episode. The king is back. The king, the Partimento king, one of my heroes, the great Professor Ewald Demeyere, and he is a harpsichordist. Of course, everyone really knows him as a Partimento and counterpoint expert, and he has returned to the program to talk about these topics in depth, and we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. And he's sitting at his instrument too, which is even more exciting. So it's going to be a great episode. Professor Demeyere, welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. And let's recap. It's been a number of years since you were on the program the first time. I think it was episode 89 or something like that. How has it been since those last couple of years? What have you been up to? And could you just give the audience an update on your endeavors since that last appearance of the program?
Absolutely. So I've been trying to continue to understand better, I would say, the compositional and improvisational practices in the 18th century, but not only sticking to Italy. I've been looking into quite some German sources as well. So, for instance, one of those sources that I really appreciate is l'ABC Musical, the Kirchhoff, which is a collection of preludes and fugues in Partimento notation, and which is of a high quality. And another collection I find particularly interesting is the third section of the Große Generalbachschule by Johann Mattheson, who basically is a bad composer, but for a reason which is quite unknown. He has composed or stolen, I don't know, a great collection, of Partimenti. And what is interesting with that collection is that he gives some explanation. So you first have the Partimento, and then you have a couple of pages of explanation where he shares with us what he thinks that is important to know to realize that Partimento in a good way. Voilà, that was that's the first section, so to speak, of what I have been doing, still doing. And then another point of interest to me is actually, how would I say it, is the output of the students in Naples. So as you know, they went through their training, their counterpoint, their Partimento counterpoint training. And then that training of counterpoint becomes gradually into composition. Actually, there was no difference between counterpoint and composition what regards terminology. And there is still a lot of work to be done in that era. Specifically the compositions that those students produced. And so until now I have been studying the most complete corpus that we have, the most extensive corpus that we have of that type of sources. And that is the compositions that Domenico Cimarosa wrote as a student at the Loreto Conservatory. And so I've been studying that, written a couple of articles, and I have some exciting plans with that, but that's still a little bit of a secret. So in a couple of years again.
Really, I think you are very well known for being an expert on the pedagogy of Fedele Fenaroli in Naples. And also want to mention to everyone, there's if you haven't seen it, I mean, and you're into Partimento and you haven't seen it, you have to look at the critical edition of Fenaroli's Partimento, which was released by Professor Demeyere. It's really wonderful. And maybe we should start there, Professor Demeyere. We should talk with Fenaroli, which I think a lot of people are interested in. He's probably one of the most popular collections of Partimenti. His rules are super popular. In terms of Partimenti, it might be the most famous. And before we start in his pedagogical curriculum, do you want to just introduce to the audience who this man was, his significance, and why we should consider his Partimenti as a good starting point?
If we look at all the collections of Partimento and of rules that we have in Naples, it's perhaps not an exaggeration to state that those by Fenaroli are the most consistent and the most well constructed, as I've said earlier, starting from scratch to arriving at being able to produce very complicated stuff like preludes and fugues. He's also one of the exceptions in his time to have published a collection of rules. So he found it important to publish the rules, regole musicali, which for us as improvisers is obviously of great value, even when it is a primer, when it is something for I would say, for debutants. There is not much nuance, the things that you are looking for when you know those things and you want to understand how you really get to composition. Those things are lacking, and it's precisely the reason why we have to go to more accomplished sources, like for instance the counterpoint books of his students and the actual compositions of his students. There is another reason why Fenaroli for me is a very important person with regard to understanding composition and improvisation in 18th century Italy. That is because it was his absolute passion. He was an accomplished composer. I have studied especially his religious music. He wrote some wonderful masses. It's also a future plan. I would like to play, to do them, execute them. But his heart, his passion was really with educating young people, and so he started very early very early on. So he was in the Durante lineage, and he has been a moment in Palermo towards the end of the 50s, and then he came back to Naples, and officially he started in 62, but there is a suspicion that he was already teaching earlier. We have one source by a certain Avellino, which is the person who wrote an homage for him on the moment that Fenaroli died in 1818. And in that source is stated that Fenaroli was already at the Loreto in 59, so a bit earlier than is generally accepted. Officially, it's 62, and so we see that in that when he starts to teach, we suppose that in that period he is starting to writing his corpus of teaching material, both Partimento, the rules, but also the actual Partimenti, and the contrapuntal material. Because what I found also interesting in that source, in Avellino, is that Avellino mentions that he is appointed to contrapunt as a counterpoint teacher, not as a Partimento teacher. I'm not sure how correct this is, but I mean, why doubt about that? At the other hand, normally the teaching of counterpoint is something which is reserved to the primo maestro. Fenaroli was secondo maestro at that time. So we are still we still don't fully know how Fenaroli functioned in that time, because what also astonishes me a little bit is that secondo maestro, so Gallo was the primo maestro until 77. How a secondo maestro was allowed to publish his regoli when the primo maestro was still there. So I have the impression that Gallo did not do much anymore, and that Fenaroli was earlier than the documents say, which is 77, that he was already primo maestro, or that he was at least an important or an equal teacher to Gallo. And then we could start speculating. Perhaps he taught someone like Cimarosa. Cimarosa studied at the Loreto in the 60s. He entered quite early in the 60s, and he graduated beginning of the 70s. And that was exactly the period when Fenaroli was teaching there. And then to finish my answer on your question, he continued teaching even with all the political turmoil going on towards the end of the century, with the French invading a lot of musicians, a lot of artists rooting for the Republic. He kept on teaching. And in 1806,
wasn't it the 70s, the 1770s, where that the level decreased? Was that really the case? And was he teaching at that time? And was that because of the political turmoil?
Yeah, I think we cannot underline that enough, that the climate, the general climate, became less and less good, and that had a huge impact on the level of musical education, on the level of music in general. And so indeed you cannot dissociate both elements from each other. And we know we have letters from Fenaroli. He complained about that. So we know that from him, we know that that was something.
Wow, how many letters do we have from Fenaroli?
I have to admit I don't know anymore, but Rosa Cafiero has found quite extensive communication between Fenaroli and one of his star pupils, Santucci, and that Rosa Cafiero had made a publication, modern publication of that exchange between both men. And yeah, obviously that's a major primary source, because we get so much information, not only on the musical aspects, but also on the general climate in Naples in that time. He goes on teaching until, if I remember well, 1806, when he retired as a teacher. But when he became one of the three directors, principals, with, if my memory suits me right, I think it was Paisiello and Tritto. So you had those three being the principles of the unified Collegio di Musica. So there was also, because of all those problems, there were less and less students in the originally 4 conservatory. Early on in the 18th century, there were 3, and then during the 18th century, another one was closed or put into another one. And so at the end of the 18th century, there were still 2. And then by a royal decree in 1806, They were, the last two were unified in one conservatory. And it is at that point that Fenaroli becomes one of the three principals of that school. And what is for me very touching is that he died of cancer. He died he died of cancer if I remember well, beginning of January 18. Yes, and he kept on teaching until December 17. So
wow.
in spite of the fact that he was obviously very sick, he was so passionate about teaching that he continued, I would say, until the bitter end.
Yeah, wow. Well, we need him today. We certainly need him today. We are in big trouble today. So we could use another Fenaroli, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
As you know, I'm a big fan, and the reason that I am so into Fenaroli is that it has always puzzled me that up until my critical edition, there was no critical edition of the most important Partimento corpus we have. And then I refer to us as the community, we just went to the edition that Emanuele Imbimbo made with Carly when they were in Paris. They had to flee to Paris because they were part of the Republicans, so to speak. So they went to Paris, and it's a beautiful edition. Imbimbo made a beautiful bilingual edition, Italian, French, and that is actually the first time that the Partimenti by Fenaroli have been published. But there are so many issues with that edition, and that was for me actually the main reason why I have plunged myself into Fenaroli, because I wanted to do the man and his amazing pedagogical output justice.
Well, that's entirely why we're here, because I think at the end of this episode, I think everyone will get a clearer sense of the way he taught, the materials he used, with an accurate sense of exactly the sources and everything. So shall we dive into some of these? Maybe the first thing here we talk about, Professor Demeyere, is the primary sources of the rules that you mentioned. And so could you talk about the various editions that were available? Wasn't this reprinted how many times was this reprinted throughout history?
I never made the
it's so popular, right? It was so popular.
I never counted the number of re-editions of the Regoli Musicali, but they're really, really a lot up until the 20th century. So it was constantly there. And what we do see is that the approach probably changed, not probably, the approach changed from being a keyboard practical craft to a paper-based craft. So they still used the same regole. They still had the grammar, so to speak, the syntax that Fenaroli put forward. But the way they used it was more as was on paper, was more as a harmony exercise. Obviously, with the big difference that in a harmony exercise, what do you do? What is the basic starting point? You see one note, and you see the next note, and then you will judge what are the possibilities for the two chords that I can put on those two notes. And then I look to the third note, and then I will look which type of chords can go as next chord. So that's a very modern approach, and that is something which was quite different I would say, in general in the 18th century, when one was thinking more in phrases. So that was still preserved even in in the 19th century. But as I've said, it is more. It has become more a written craft than a craft at the keyboard, as it was in Fenaroli's time.
Although he probably also
contributed a little bit already to the more fixed, more fixed realizations, plural, not singular. But I will speak about that perhaps a little bit later. Now I will answer your question regarding the primary sources. For me, if I look at everything we have from the Fenaroli circle, so to speak, I consider the editions of the regole, the handwritten copies of the regole, and then all the manuscripts with the musical examples and the Partimento as primary sources. Why? Because those sources, so at the one hand the regole, at the other hand the manuscripts with the examples and the Partimenti, reflect 100% what Fenaroli did for about 50 years in his life.
50 years of teaching, wow.
Yeah, if he starts, even a little bit more, if you say that he started in 1759 and ended in 1817, voila, almost 60 years even. The core business is this. So you have those sources, and for me that was also an eye-opener when I started digging in Italian archives and libraries. I kept on seeing the same things, and I have a great friend and colleague in Peter van Toer. So we shared our knowledge and we shared our sources. And we saw that these things come back, but so many times.
Right.
In
almost the same order always. So it's not that in one source you will find a certain order and then you will find another source that completely contradicts that. No,
right.
There are small
difference. We cannot deny that, but the overall structure is overwhelmingly consistent and coherent that you cannot.
So if we take 1775 and 1814, are you saying then that generally speaking, even though there's a gap of 40, 50 years, the rules are generally the same, and even the Partimenti themselves are the same exercises decades ago?
That's fascinating with Fenaroli, that he sticks to his material, both for Partimento as for counterpoint. You see also the counterpoint exercises. You see them come back, even when we are early in the 80s. We have a very important source beginning of the 80s, and we see coming exactly those exercises in the 19th century,
at the end of his career.
So other teachers varied their musical material. For him, it made more sense to stick to that same material. Why? Because
it was
very good, or it is very good. Why change something which is very good? Obviously, as a teacher, you try to vary your pedagogical material for yourself, not to get bogged down, not to get bored.
It didn't happen apparently.
Are they contemporary accounts of people saying he was a great teacher? Or did people say, "Oh, he's awesome teacher. He's wonderful teacher"? I think there was Michael Kelly, I think one of Mozart's friends, who wanted to study with Fenaroli with an I.
Fenaroli with an I, yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember if he actually studied with Fenaroli. I know that he was disgusted with I remember that he was disgusted with the terrible noise
in the conservatory.
And I think he said, "This is nothing for me. I will go away.
It's like
But indeed-
one room with 8 harpsichords or something like that.
Exactly, and then in the steps, a child is playing the horn, and it looks as if his head will explode or something like that.
This is the greatest conservatory maybe in history, and this is the condition. So maybe in the modern conservatory, if somebody complains, it's not quiet enough, we can just point to this historical example and say, look, they had it much worse.
Yes, but at the other hand, we have to put that a little bit into perspective also, because what is happening there are the debutants. So at that stage, indeed, the children were put together, and they were making noise, a terrible noise, all together. But from the moment that they were a little bit more advanced, they did have more or less terrible
Conditions,
less
essentially.
situation to
Right.
do their stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you see, for instance, here I've put the very first reference to the manuscript in this little bit of the regole. So in that time, let's say that editing was cumbersome.
Right.
It was not at all a fluent process, and it was very expensive. And so when you see the Regole Musicali for the first time is published quite late, I mean in 75, that the process of printing was still quite primitive. So there are no musical examples in the Regole. And how did Fenaroli find a solution for that? Have a look at the penultimate line. He says there, vedi l'esempio nel manoscritto sotto la lettera A. So see the example in the manuscript under the letter A. And so here he is referring, when you read the Regole, if you want to understand what the suspension of the fourth is all about, if you want to see that in music, then you have to look at the example in the manuscript under the letter A. But we don't have his manuscript. We did not have his autograph manuscript, but we have dozens and dozens and dozens of manuscripts with those examples in.
And so I have put
we
that
actually have his solution, so to speak, his answers, his exemplars.
Yes, it is. You see it here. You see it on the same slide. So at the left hand side of this slide, you see the bit of the Regole. I've tried to make that clear that this is not one publication. So you see below there Naples, Mazzola Voccola. That is the editor of the Regole, the first person who produced the Regole in 75. And then to the right of that, you see an example, just a fragment from an example of one of those manuscripts. And this is a manuscript that I have discovered in the archive of San Francesco in Bologna. And it's a stunning manuscript. It's a very nice feeling that you discover something which has been uncovered since 200 odd years. That's a wonderful feeling. You feel a little bit like a detective. And the contents of that, I will speak about that a little bit later. The contents of that source is actually quite old, because book 1 and 2 are fairly standard, but book 3 is, there is evolution in book 3. And so this source has less Partimenti in book 3 and a few how would I say, alternative versions which point at an earlier stage of Fenaroli's third book.
Now, I just have 2 questions. Now, I noticed that these are like 4-voiced solutions, and is that because it's teaching a real harmony exercise here. It's really
Yeah.
teaching the full voices. Is that the reason? And correct me if I'm wrong, but like, is that more for beginners if you're thinking of more voices?
Excellent question. Perhaps we can anticipate a few slides. Can you go a little bit further?
This one?
Yes, this one. If you look here, this is actually the verso side of the very first page of this beautiful manuscript about which we saw the title page. So you have the title page, and then at the verso side, at the other side, we get this page. And so what do we see here? We see what we call today, generally call today, the rule
of the octave.
Of the octave, yeah.
Was the rule of the octave.
But which wasn't a term which was not used then. They just, as you see there on top, you have scale in prima posizione,
So
scales in first position. To answer your question now, have a look at the figures above the notes.
Yeah.
the figures above the notes
Actually are a stenographic notation for the right hand. So they really translate literally into chords, into in German we say Griffe, into chords. And so you see that it's quite thick, four voiced, with three voices in
the right hand.
Sometimes 5 voices, is that right?
Exactly.
And he did not care about parallelism, so you will see doublings of leading notes, you will see parallel octaves, you will see parallel fifths. And I often get this question, but how it is possible that...
He's a counterpoint teacher, right?
Yes, how it is possible that he allowed this, this way of producing scalar passages, realizing scalar passages. The answer is very simple. He didn't care at this stage. The thing is that the student required a frame of reference for sonorities. And so when you have with the double F sharp, he doesn't care.
But on every
stage of the scale, the student acquires a familiarity with a particular sonority. Going up, going down is different, of course. And so at this stage, the voice leading was not an issue. When learning the rule of the octave, let's call it like that, voice leading was not an issue. It was the acquiring of sonorities on each scale step in the scale. Coming back to the cadences, it is still in this light, in this concept of having indeed more or less a vertical approach to the cadence. But there is already the contrapuntal element, because the three basic cadences are actually, they actually show already lines. You see that you have, when you have the composta, for instance, you have a suspension. So there is both an element of verticality, but at the same time there is an element of horizontality. And you see that is already a step towards a more refined way of going about things in Partimenti.
Partimento is not for everyone, right? It's not exactly like this thing that everybody did. It was not easy, first of all. I mean, you have to be able to know how to play the keyboard. You have to be able to be a good reader. And then you have to have a creative side to yourself that you need to have some talent to be able to conceive of these. No, I don't think every single Neapolitan boy had the enough of it to be skilled. So would you say that this was for the composer track, so to speak?
Actually, at a certain point in the training, that became that became an issue. So you had the basic training in Partimento, and after a couple of years, there was, you could call it an exam, and at that point, there was, the teachers, there was a jury, the teachers decided that student.
No, he's not enough. He
Right.
has to do something.
But another student, he is good enough at that point, he can start the counterpoint training. And parallel with that counterpoint training, there is the advanced Partimento class. And that is something which we see very clearly in Fenaroli's output. So you have basically the first two books and the moti del basso, the movimenti del basso, so the schemata, if you want, of the third book, which constitute the primary Partimento class, the basic Partimento class.
Is that book 3? Book 3 is the basic, like the...
Book three is ambiguous. I mean, book 3 can go over to the primary class, but can also go to the advanced class. There is one. It's also in the slides. There is one source that explains that. There is one source that explains that students have to work through books 1 and 2 with the figured Partimenti, that is what that source gives, and the movimenti del basso. And at that point, he can start counterpoint.
And this is how someone should learn counterpoint, right? I mean, they should start practically. It should be a physical, get your hands in and learn it with your ears and your heart, so to speak. Just really get into it, right?
They didn't write, they practically didn't write before the counterpoint training. It is, as you say, they learned it practically at the keyboard. And that is what makes this method, so to speak, also so valuable today, that students today see the link with their instrument, see the link with living music, that it is not dead matter,
Right, it's something which is
very much alive and in link with what they do every day.
Right. So I jumped ahead, but this is the slide after the title page, I think, right?
Exactly. The reason why I've put this one in is because when you compare the regole with all the manuscripts, there is a contradiction in between both. The regole start with the cadences, the 3 cadences, and then explain the rule of the octave, scale. In all the manuscripts that I have seen, it's always the opposite. All the manuscripts start with the scales, with the rule of the octave, and afterwards they explain the cadences. I do the opposite. I start with my students with the cadences because it's less complicated, and I see the rule of the octave as an elaboration of a cadence. A cadence is basically 1-5-1. So semplice. Now I have 3 more notes in my left hand that I can put in between that G and D. So the first one I put in is the B. Then I don't have to do anything with my right hand. Very simple. Then I can put in the C. And then I put in the A.
so I have
I
my
think
cadence.
I have to stop talking and we just play for the rest of the interview. What am I doing talking? What is up with the talking? Okay.
Thank you.
Please, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so here I have put in a couple of pages from Regole, where you see at the right on the right page here, delle cadenze. Here he starts to explain the cadences, and then when you go to the next slide, he finishes the cadences, and then the next topic is delle scale. So that is that's different in the regole and the manuscripts. You always have this difference. In the regole, order is cadences, scale, and in the manuscripts it's always scale and then cadences.
Now,
And then afterwards,
go ahead.
go ahead. And I just wanted to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Then I wanted to say that.
The structure of the books are all the same. Each book starts with rules and finishes off with a series of partimenti. And this is what you see here. So we've had the section on the scale, we had the sections on the cadenze, and now we have the application, so to speak, of what we have learned concretely in a series of 16 partimenti.
Does Fenaroli expect you to do like Parma level manuscript realizations of the first one, or does he really want you to just play simple consonances in the first? I mean, does he expect you to be do we come back after a few years of practice and really show off this Partimento, or is there a certain limitation of the expectations of what the Partimento wants you to deliver?
Excellent question. If you look at the first book, obviously those partimenti do not have the ambition to be basis of accomplished compositions. If you look at the first one, you get something very simple. Etc., etc., etc. So there are only quarter notes, some half notes, and a whole note. So in general, you will not call this an accomplished composition.
But I've seen you and other people take something simple like this and make it like high level. You know what I mean?
Yes, but that is also the versatility of the material. The material allows to be flexible and versatile depending on the level of the student also. Because when I give this Partimento, for instance, to three different students of mine, I will probably have 3 different realizations. When I have a student really starting out, I am very happy that he or she plays
which is not my
sounds good to
ideal,
me.
but it's not
ideal artistically, because it's quite vertical and there is not much attention going on in the realm of counterpoint. But perhaps I have a student that is a student who is talented and who plays, I don't know, one day this version, and then who wants to make it more accomplished. And then we could already go from 4 parts to 3 parts. 3-part realization, which allows much more detail, much more attention going to the quality of each individual phrase. Instead of repeating that G thrice in the first bar, I could decide on putting a half note, a dotted half note, and having a horizontal ID, and then in 3 parts, with, for instance, in the middle part, then a parallel third in the middle voice. When I play the G, I play the B on it. When I play the B in the bass, second beat, I play the D on it. Then that D will leap down to the A. That is my middle voice. My top voice. So I have three completely different gestures. I have my bass. I have my top voice. And I have my middle voice. Put together.
So even when, as you see the
Music seems to be extremely simple, you can give already so much attention.
Good to me.
those things, yeah, but
This is really the thinking as a composer right from the beginning. And then with the better student, you could even go further. And you see that, for instance, there's a gap in between the first two notes. Perhaps triggering that student to fill in that gap and to play 8 notes. Etc., etc. And everything starts just from that, from those basic rules that you have learned, simple ones, and that you start to open. But you always fall back. You have the reflex of falling back on skeletal notes, on main notes, and you always have those in front of your third eye, and then you can develop that. You can play around with that.
Okay, so I have a
that I
question.
find so fascinating.
We could spend forever on the first book one. But my quick question is this: how many realizations should you exhaust before you go on to number 2?
Depends on the student. Also, I would say this is a hugely important point, and colleagues of mine, I know Peter van Toer also spreads this message. I spread this message wherever I can, whenever I can. The big difference between, let's call it traditional harmony and counterpoint, where you produce one version, is that in Neapolitan and also in Bologna, in Italy, let's call it like that in general, that you produce as many good solutions as you can. I have done the math. I have been looking through the counterpoint books by a certain Biagio Muscogiuri, which is a counterpoint student of Fenaroli at the beginning of the 80s, 1780s. And I have notated how many versions of the Movimenti del Basso, of the Moti del Basso, he made. And there are Moti del Basso where there are more than 30 versions of one stupid bass. So that is not always possible, of course, when you have a little Partimento like the one that we have here. But the idea is, I want to explore as many options as possible, because I am being trained as a composer, and as a composer I have to be as versatile as possible.
Right. We should talk a little bit about book 2 now. Now, book 2 is it's a step up, right, from book 1.
Yeah, book 2. As you see, I've stipulated a little bit what the contents is. Book 2 is a step up. In book 2, the focus is completely on suspensions. So suspension basically is a foreign note, vertically a foreign note, with preparation. So this means that foreign note in the former chord, in the former sonority, was a consonance. On the moment that we are on the strong beat, it becomes a dissonance. That is the suspension. And then it resolves 95 times out of 100 it resolves going down. That's the basic rule. I've played the composta. The composta is already a beautiful example, actually, of this concept. That's also something which is typical for this kind of training, is that things are introduced without too much explaining them, and then afterwards we get more into that thing. And the suspension is already dealt with briefly when you do the cadences. I played the composta, and the G was a consonance while I played the G major sonority. And then it becomes a fourth, a dissonance fourth against the A, resolving to the third. And so this idea, this concept, this ornamental note, a very important one, is the main point of the second book.
For the Neapolitans, does dissonance equals suspension? Are they the same thing? Because what about things like appoggiaturas, accented passing notes? Are those dissonances in the same sense?
Yes, but everything depends on the metric position. So a suspension falls on the strong beat, while a passing note falls on a weak beat. Something which is passing through. Transitus is the Latin term that one utilizes for that. What I wanted to say, in the second book, the suspension is the point of interest, and Fenaroli starts with suspensions in the top voices. So, for instance, here we actually get a repetition of the cadenza composta, and here you see that he starts with dealing with the dissonance of the fourth, which is prepared via the octave. That is exactly what I have just played. And what is interesting here is that in the second book, he always uses the same sequence of keys in which the student has to study the.
So it's not like all straight away you have to do 24 in one shot.
Have a look here. You have G major. You have A minor, B minor, C major, D, etc. So you have this stepping up from G up to F, always taking the least complicated minor or major. And then he finishes with two slightly more complicated keys, B flat major and E flat major.
And so this is something which comes back
for every rule in the second book.
Right.
And the second book is also special
because can you just go back once? Yeah. The second book is also special because he is using what I have baptized preliminary Partimenti. Not with every, but with most of the rules. So you have here the rule of the dissonant fourth prepared by the octave.
Mm-hmm. And there is a little
Partimento, very, very specific Partimento to train that.
And so in this book,
this is in the book, right? Is this in one of his? This is in book 2, essentially.
This is book 2, yes.
Here we are in book
2, and so most of the rules are accompanied by a modest theoretical Partimento, so to speak.
Now, if you were a teacher, if let's say you were to teach a student from the beginning, would you say to yourself, okay, why don't we go through book 1? We won't talk about dissonances or suspensions at all. We'll just do the consonances. And then I'll only talk about it in book 2. Is that a smart thing to do, or what do you think? I know you answered if you had a more advanced student, you probably would do more advanced things. But what do you think about that?
You already gave the answer yourself. I will not keep a talented student down because I want to stick to my method. I don't believe in that, and I am sure, I'm not sure, of course, but I can imagine that the passionate teacher that Fenaroli was, he probably would have done the same thing. When I have in my first book a passage where a sonority would take too long to just play the basic sonority, well, that is the place where the suspension should come in. That is all. That's a basic rule. When you have you have a certain passage. Can I give an example here?
Why, number one.
Yes. Let's go to the last.
First line.
The
Right
last. Yeah.
So you have a C sharp in the bass, and you have a D. I will say another something about the C sharp, but I would like to focus first on the D. So that D lasts for 2 beats. Instead of just giving immediately the D major sonority, exactly, and stop the musical flow, so to speak, I will postpone my F sharp, I will postpone my third, and I replace it with my fourth. And so I gave a musically interesting solution to a small rhythmic problem, to a problem because the note, the D, is actually too long. This is something that the student potentially has already recognized when studying the cadences, because when you deal with the cadences, you explain harmonic rhythm. You say that when your bass note on 5 lasts 1 beat, you play 1 chord, 1 sonority. When your bass note takes 2 beats, you will add dissonance to it. And as such, you give a musical...
Is that better? Is that superior to maybe just playing another note of the chord? So maybe 2 separate notes of the chord.
That's a position change. We just noticed that they did not find that the first choice was not to do that. The first choice was to add dissonance to it. The other, can you put the thing back, the slide back?
Okay.
That's it, yeah. Now I have spoken about a consonant chord that is too long to give directly as it is, so we add dissonance to it. You could also do the opposite. And we stay in the same bar. Let's look at the C sharp now.
Okay.
Being a good student.
I know that on the C sharp, I would play a 6/5 chord because I go up from 7 to 1. So the rule of the octave says when you go from 7 to 1, on the 7 you normally play a 6/5 chord. But there I have the problem that again, that C sharp does not take 1 beat, but takes 2 beats. What I can do is what I have baptized to horizontalize the dissonance. So instead of playing the 7th or the A and the G vertically together in 2 different voices, I can omit the G on the first beat and produce a pure 6th chord. No friction with 2 A's. So there is an A in the top voice, there's an A in the tenor. And now my G will appear as passing 7th, as passing note in the top voice.
Ooh.
And so, depending on the level of the student, I decide whether or not it is appropriate already to speak about those things. Or I can just do, as you have said, I will have a position change. I don't know. Then there is a melodic thing, descending third motif, as something which is absolutely okay, but slightly less contrapuntal, slightly less good.
Wonderful. Now, let's just quickly take a look at the remaining slides of book 2 here. This is, I see 426.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say,
Suspensions?
Yes, indeed. The
In
first
book 2?
yes, the big chunk of rules in book 2 regards the suspensions in the top voice. And Fenaroli reserves 2 rules, very important rules, for suspensions in the bass. And so the first one you see here. And when I play it, it is actually... You see in the middle of the bar, middle of the first bar, you see a 4-2.
Yes.
And he explains that when the bass becomes, first scale step, so when the bass becomes a tied note, and it goes down half a step, and it goes back to the initial note, in that case you have to play a minor fourth, he calls that.
A minor fourth, right?
Minor
Which is
fourth.
what-
We would call it a pure fourth, of course, but he speaks of a minor fourth. So can you know this? Do you know this piece? So that is the
By
first.
John Bach, right?
That's by John Bach for the French, indeed. That's the first prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, and this demonstrates this rule of the minor fourth. So you have G, C, and that C stays put and becomes a diminished fifth with the F sharp, and that F sharp comes back to G, and the C goes to B. This is rule number 1 when you have a suspension on the on the first scale step. Sorry. Now we go to the next slide. So the first 3 beats in that bar in the bass, the first 4 beats in the first bar are the same, but now compare the first note of the second bar. Can you switch from one slide to another?
Yes.
So you see that in the first bar, both examples do this. Can you give the next slide? Same bass. But now the big difference is that the note that opens the second bar is not a G anymore. It is a E. And so in other words, there is uscita di tono. There is, in modern terms, there is a modulation. We don't think anymore according to the scale of G major. We are invited, obliged, to think according to the scale of D major. And Fenaroli says that in this case, on the moment of suspension, you have to play quarta maggiore, a major fourth, which obviously we would call in modern terms an augmented fourth. And then you hear, yes, this sounds as D, and then the conclusion is indeed
Now, Professor
D major.
Demeyere, in the rule of the octave, why is there such a fancy chord descending? Why is that non-key note in the rule of the octave descending?
Precisely because of the reason that the leading notes, it's the 7th scale step. When I stick in we are in G major, so let's stick in G major. When I go down my scale, there is this perception of D major. When I just play with that as an even momentary end note, you will have this perception of D
printer?
major. Modulating printer or normal printer, whatever term that you
want to.
stick to it. And so they confirm. And now at this point, if rats have eaten the score, It happens that rats have eaten the score. You cannot know whether or not you will stay in G or whether you will stay in D or whether you will reconfirm G major. I do two versions. So there we have G major. So I have eliminated the parfum, so to speak, of D major, reconfirming G major. But now I will do something else. In this case, my initial gesture, which was ambiguous, is it D major, is it G major, is made very clear that the D major that I have suggested is really D major.
And that is beautiful.
To accept that there is this ambiguity in the rule of the octave.
And in
a minor key, of course, but I felt that you were going into that direction. In a minor key, you don't have that ambiguity. Because in a minor key, this is such an amazing chord.
but
it stays very well put in G minor because of the E flat. There is no E natural. So you have that augmented sixth, which keeps it within G minor. So there is no possibility of going to D minor via that chord. Then you have to raise the bass from E flat to E natural. There I am in D minor, while I stay in G minor.
Beautiful. And this is the last slide now for book 2. I guess this is an example Partimenti. It looks definitely of another scale compared to book 1. Look at the whole page is almost black.
Exactly. So this is the second series of Partimenti, concluding. So you have a series concluding book 1. This is the series concluding book 2. And there are 14 instead of 16.
But they have exactly
the same key sequence. I found that just interesting to notice that we have exactly the same sequence of keys, and it's much more accomplished, as you see. It is not it's not a preliminary Partimento, because you have you have a lot of different suspensions within one particular Partimento. You see, for instance, here the opening is the first rule, is the 4-3, is the octave preparing the suspension of the fourth. But but if you look further in the piece, for instance, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you see that there are a number of consecutive tied over notes, and that is something, strictly speaking, that he has dealt with to a certain extent, but he has not dealt with consecutive
suspensions.
And again, I see in those things that idea of anticipating rules, which will come in book 3, the moti del basso, so the schemata, if you want, without too much going into it at this stage, but then expanding it when the time is right. But it has already infiltrated at an earlier stage. Can I say something else about this?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Have a look at the first 2 bars. There are other versions where on the third beat of the second bar there is a D. So here you see a C. And I think that the reason why this correction or this modification or this alternative has been notated in certain versions is that you have to admit that there is a peculiar difference between the musical contents of the first bar and the contents of the second bar. The first bar is very busy, while the second bar is calmer. And that is always an indication. The student at that time knew that something special has to go on there. And that the busy part can go on top of the not so busy part. And inspiration-wise, otherwise, and the other direction also. So this means if you repeat the bass motif in the second bar, you would get. But obviously you need the D in the middle of the bar. You cannot play this in this style. This is not something one should do. So I find that interesting that in certain sources this note has been corrected, has been modified into D.
Can you speak a little bit? Yeah, maybe you could speak on that, Professor Ewald. Can you talk about the differences in all the different manuscripts? Because you did a lot of legwork to find perhaps an authoritative sort of one that people can use as their main version of the Partimento. Can you address that problem? Because there have been, like you said, thousands of reprints, thousands of manuscripts. This has been reprinted over and over and over. So how did you come to find like the best version of each Partimento?
That's again an excellent question, and at the same time, it's a question I think they would not pause. They would not ask that question, because Partimenti are material they used to learn. It's hands-on material. It is not material that you cannot touch. It's not material that is holy, material that you would put on a pedestal and pray to, so to speak. And that is for me also the reason why, when I assess all those manuscripts, is that okay, there are a lot of similarities, but there is also quite some differences between them. Most of all, I would say, regarding figures, perhaps less regarding notes, although I find different versions regarding to notes, but more regarding to figures. And that shows you that the presence of figures is actually most of the time redundant, or not redundant, but like the little wheels on a children's bike.
When a
child starts to ride a bike, what do parents do? They put 2 extra small wheels at the back that the child does not fall over. That is how figures in the beginning of the training have to be seen. It's an extra aid, but in fact you don't need them, because you know the rules. That is the force of Partimento. You don't need the figures to figure out, figure of speech, to figure out what is expected actually above that bass. And so when you see all those different manuscripts, as an editor, it's a nightmare, of course, because you have to, you have to make a decision. And that's why I was so happy that I came across one source also from the San Francesco in Bologna, which was for me the most coherent manuscript of them all. And I have chosen that manuscript as principal manuscript for my edition. But when I found alternative figures that were as good, I have included them in my edition via an ossia stave. So you will see, if you look at my edition, you will see the normal Partimento, and then from time to time you will see a small ossia stave, and that is exactly a fragment, so to speak, that is different from in another manuscript. Voila, there you already see one regarding the bass.
Here's another one.
And And there you see there's the figures which are different. I think it's too small, I can't read it, but I think it's the
See if I can
it's
zoom
the
in.
it's the yes, indeed. So you see where you see in the major source on the D sharp, you see 7/5. You see in most alternative sources, you will see 6/5. Both are equally good. So it's not to me to judge. It depends on what you want to do, how you want to express that particular passage. And so I found it a very rewarding way of editing. Instead of being the almighty editor, I wanted to be the humble editor and proposing other versions when they were there.
Now this begs the question. I mean, the Imbimbo edition is so beautifully printed. It has Fenaroli's stamp of approval. Why not just go with Imbimbo?
But that's what most of my colleagues have done. As I've said, I was always uncomfortable with Imbimbo for a number of reasons. He made some decisions that I find strange. We know that Fenaroli was involved to a certain extent to the publication of Imbimbo's edition, but he complained of many errors in a letter to Santucci. It remains speculation, of course, because we don't know exactly what he considered to be an error and what he considered to be a modification that was acceptable. But there are things that, to me, are unacceptable. And the most unacceptable thing that Imbimbo has done, that is that he has moved all the Partimenti from book 1 to book 2, but not opening book 2, but after the rules and the preliminary Partimenti of book 2. So this means that you imagine you are a student. That means that you start with the rule of the octave and the cadences. No Partimenti. Then you see book 2, suspensions. And then you have the preliminary exercises on the suspensions. And after that, you have the first series of Partimenti of book 1. So it is as if you step down and you have a major step down. You have done Partimenti which are much more difficult. And then you go to Partimenti which are easier in musical contents. I've never understood that decision, and I cannot believe that Fenaroli would approve of that decision, because all the manuscripts show that.
In your book 2, the critical edition, it doesn't start with 1. It starts with A. It starts with B.
Yes,
C.
but those are yes, exactly. The A is actually the preliminary Partimento of rule number A.
Mm.
So this is not the series of 14 Partimenti. If you scroll down,
right,
after the lettered numbered Partimenti, you will see that there will be a number 1.
Yes.
So this is
there we are.
That's the number 1 that we just saw.
Right.
I bet you see the D, by the way, in the second bar on the third beat.
And even this has extensive osseas as well.
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely. Wow. It shows you again the concern or the wish to vary as much as possible.
Hmm.
So not only when you are playing yourself, but also when you are copying. Why would I copy literally?
Yeah.
I want to change a little thing. I see another possibility for a musical problem.
No, that's interesting, because now the final book is book 3, and we're not talking about the later canon and fugue books, but for his general actual pedagogy that he used for decades and decades, Book 3 was the main book, and look at it
No,
as an enormous number of Partimenti, 49, which is way
That
more
is
than
not-
book 1 and 2.
That's not correct. Huh? So we have to pay attention. There is confusion about that. Some people think that Fenaroli never thought prelude and fugue. That is not true. From the start, there was a fourth book. So Fenaroli's Partimento curriculum consisted of 4 books.
Ah,
Book 1,
Scale and Cadenze. Book 2, Suspensions. Book 3, Movimenti. And that's a huge book. I will say something in a minute about that. But book 4 has 22 preludes and fugues. 12 in what I've called the common keys, and 10 in more complicated keys. So
wow.
we know that very, very late, for especially for the Imbimbo edition, Fenaroli decided on composing a new book of fugues, 55 fugues. He calls it my 5th book,
Ah,
while Imbimbo calls it the 6th book. There's a lot of confusion about that, but it is very, very clear actually. So Fenaroli, for his long teaching career, had 4 books, the 4th of which was a real contrapuntal affair with 22 preludes and fugues. So Fenaroli, you would think, yeah, he comes from the Durante lineage. He would not
teach
I was just
counterpoint.
gonna ask that, because isn't he Durante
he
is
has-
known as a melodic composer over the bass?
Absolutely. But you see, that is not that simple. It is not that that black and white.
Yeah.
And what do you think? I mean, Fenaroli was a composer for liturgical music, and he had to train also students for liturgical music. When I studied, for instance, Cimarosa, all apart from one piece, composition that Cimarosa wrote as a student at the Loreto, are all liturgical compositions. And fugue was a major element of liturgical composition. A Christe, per definition, was very often a fugue.
In the Gloria,
You find fugues. In the Credo, you find fugues. So if that has not been trained at the keyboard,
if that has not been
Incomplete.
you are not
Wow.
an accomplished composer. And hence, the 4th book is a very important book with preludes and fugues, and was there from, I mean, at least from the 70s. So it is not something that he has composed much later. It was firmly rooted in his pedagogy, but it was the advanced course.
Right.
And when I have to make a calculation in the manuscripts of which manuscripts contain 3 books and which manuscripts contain 4 books or only 4 books, the majority is the basic Partimento course. You find much more sources with book 1, 2, and or 3.
Nobody
find-
made it to book 4. Book 4 was too hard.
It's logical. It is at that point that there was a big test, and that the students that were not good enough were said, you
Washed
cannot
out.
continue. It's only for the good ones. But just want to re-say that Fenaroli did whole his career did teach at the Partimento level fugue, and he did teach counterpoint, and he did teach written fugue. So we really have to put that in context, that we don't say, yeah, the Leo school is only counterpoint,
Yeah.
and the Durante lineage is only melody on a bass. It's not that simple. It's not that extreme.
Now that you've said that about book 4, is Libro number 4 in the works ever in the future for the critical edition?
I've decided not to do it because of the fact that it's not necessary. The material that Imbimbo gives is good. Just that you know that his book 5 is Fenaroli's book 4. So I'm not planning on doing it because it's a tremendous amount of work. It's just not necessary. It was necessary with the first 3 books because that is really a very complicated affair. But for the 4th one, I've decided on not to do it.
We skipped over my favorite book number 3, which has all the fun stuff. It has all the fun stuff. We can't leave book 3. We have to talk a little bit about book 3 and all the beautiful, beautiful bass motions.
Yeah.
Now, why does he have 49 Partimenti in book 3?
It's fascinating. I've been studying that and the sources of that 3rd book since so many years, and I think I have some plausible answers. But first of all, to answer your question in a very straightforward way, but there are so many movimenti, so you have to have a lot of partimenti to be able to internalize them. If you look at the quantity, if you compare the quantity of moti, of movimenti, in relation to the other rules, it's exponential. So there are so many movimenti del basso that you need a lot of partimento to be able to train them in a good way. And here also, when you look at the partimenti, when you look at the moti, the way Fenaroli gives the moti, he gives several options. Thank you for this one. That's a beautiful one. And I took this one because it takes the suspension in the bass a step further. You see
that it
becomes all the way down.
All the way down, exactly the whole octave down.
And he gives several options. So the first system is an application of a completely diatonic realization. So this means that you every note that you play in the right hand is according to G major. Beautiful, nothing to say. And then he does the same thing with the 2 upper voices swapped. I won't play it now. But now look to the second line. In the second line, he develops another idea. And this is an idea that emerges from the rule that they have learned earlier, that you have the possibility of a major 4th or a minor 4th. And when the bass continues to go down, normally you play a major, so an augmented 4th. And this is what is happening here. And the consequence of that is that you will have, let's call it just simply in modern terms, a modulation every half a bar. Because for instance, in the first bar, you start in G, and then you have a suggestion of D major. Now, he could have continued that idea that every half a bar in the bass is 4/3 of the respective key. The only place he could not do that is the beginning of the second bar, because he would be in C sharp minor, which is way, way, way too far from G major. I will play it that you hear it. You immediately hear, oh my God, this is completely out of this world. And this is the only segment of this realization where he respects the diatonic realization. But all the other ones are focusing on 4/3 in their respective keys.
I noticed this.
And so when
a
you
lot
want
of them
to...
are now, the examples are now 3 voice But
Yes.
I noticed right here at the end here, he suddenly has a 4-voiced chord, a 5-voiced
Yes.
chord to a 4.
Yes.
So why does he mix and match them?
That is that flexibility that they allow, that they have, that they want. There is this element of, there is this combination of a very horizontal thinking, when you have this kind of motti del basso, that it's quite horizontal affair. But then when you want to stress a certain moment, when you want to have more emphasis in a cadence, think horizontally for a moment and add 1 or 2 notes, and then you have something more telling. That I find fascinating, that it is not, it's not rigid.
Yeah.
Texture is not rigid.
This wouldn't fly in Germany, right?
It would. Look to Bach. Bach does the same thing.
Okay.
Even in fugues, you see that he varies. When he comes to the end of a fugue, he adds stuff. He wants to have more material.
Oh, really? Because some people say some people say that. I mean, people say that he's very strict with the voices and extremely strict with the voices.
Which people are that? No, just kidding.
People, them, they.
No, I mean, no. It's not. Just do the test. Look through the 2 books of the Wohltemperierte Klavier and look to the end of the fugues. You will see that it's not. I mean, it's strict for a lot of time, but even there he leaves out a voice if it doesn't suit him. Then the voice comes back. But towards the end, there are often more voices than the indication, for instance, in some editions for 3 voices or for 4 voices. So it remains flexible. And it is something which is very important to underline, that we have to have the same flexibility. Your favorite book, book 3 by Fenaroli. There are Partimenti where you could realize, I think, should be realized as an. Can you have my edition of my 3rd book?
Yeah, let's go to it. In fact, I think this is it.
You have
Libro
it here.
Terzo.
Let's go. I think it's somewhere between Partimento 10, 11, and 12. That's the one. If you look at this beginning, this is what I was speaking about earlier. You have 2 bars boring, and then another 2 bars interesting. This is an invention. I mean, you can play this as an invention, a 2-part invention. So I played 2 parts.
Until now, only 2 parts.
But look to what is coming now. This section that comes is a typical section to have 3 parts. There is 1 voice running in parallel thirds with the bass, and another voice producing a long note. And those 2 voices will swap every bar. So I will play from the second system on. And so you see that this flexibility of changing of texture is something which is embedded in the compositional thinking. The beginning is actually, I mean, you can realize it with more voices, of course, but the essence of the beginning is 2-part setting, while the essence of the first episode is a 3-part setting, and thus I respect that.
Now, why is this? What is going on here? This is this.
I wanted to put this example in because I've spoken about the flexibility of the 3rd book. By the way, this is book 4 in Imbimbo. Imbimbo has split up the rules of the movimenti, becoming book 3. And the Partimenti on those movimenti becoming book 4. You don't find that in the manuscripts. That is 1 book, albeit a big one. And so you see that Fenaroli has started off with 40 odd Partimenti, and that he has added 9 more. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think that he did that because often the Partimenti were too difficult. And so we see that in those, it's supposition, because we can't be sure about that. But I suppose that the new Partimenti have been composed, have been added to propose a simpler Partimento on a moto del basso that was already trained in another Partimento that was more complex. That is something that I see. And then to answer your question, and I wanted to say first, but then to answer your question, we see that at the end of the collection, and that is in all the manuscripts that I found the case, we find 5 Partimenti which have an indication for realization. So here you see that the first 2 bars are realized.
That's from Fenaroli, right?
That's Fenaroli. That is Fenaroli. And I suppose that this is something, I will say another way, I suppose it's kind of a homage to his own teacher, Durante, because you know obviously that an important genre of Partimento within the Durante Partimento material are the so-called Partimenti diminuiti. And so the idea of diminuiti is double. Diminuiti means on the one hand, diminuiti means on the one hand that the right hand is elaborated, for which he gives incipits. He calls them modi. So like here, you have a couple of bars, the realization, inspiration for realization. But often in Durante, I see the term Partimento diminuito also regarding to the bass. Not many people see it like this, but for me, it also means that the original movimento, the original moto, has been varied in such a way that it has been provided with diminutions. A very famous one of Durante. The basic bass is there. And so he makes diminutions out of them. It's the one with the typical bariolage setting.
So there's this slide that I think might be a good slide to summarize it, which is an observation here by Fenaroli himself, is it? And is this by Fenaroli himself?
We don't know.
Okay.
This is a slightly later source, and we suppose that it is something that Fenaroli might have said. That is, I've already mentioned this one a little bit earlier during our talk. So he says, here is stated that before you can start counterpoint, you should study the first 2 books and the movimenti of the 3rd book. And at that point, you are ready to embark on, if you are good enough, you are ready to embark on the counterpoint study. And that for me shows also, explains to a certain extent why this 3rd book with Partimenti is perhaps less organized and more chaotic in all the different manuscripts. You get many orders. What I did is that I made a database of those manuscripts to be able to see the order in all those manuscripts, and I was not really able to make some sense out of it. So it shows to me that this 3rd book was very flexible and used as Fenaroli thought it should be used. For certain students in the basic Partimento training course, he must have used a lot of Partimento from the 3rd book. Perhaps with less advanced students, he used less of that book. Perhaps that's the reason also why he composed those extra 9 to have some less complicated Partimenti also in the third book. I'm also quite convinced that that book was still utilized during the counterpoint training, because there are several Partimenti of the third book which have the potential of fugal openings. There is a beautiful F minor, for instance, which can be played in a fugal way. So I really see that as a versatile book that can lean over to the basic or to the advanced Partimento class. A little bit like we teach also. We don't, I mean, we are not rigid. It really depends on, sorry, I always say the same thing. It really depends on the level of the student.
Right, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's been a tremendous time. I mean, I've learned so much, and I hope that it's kind of helped people understand in a very much clearer way how Fenaroli taught, the path he took. And well, Professor Demeyere, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the program for the second time. I really hope you'll come back again. I have a surprise, though. Okay, it's like a TV show. I want you to react. I want you to react to something. Okay.
Okay.
So, now
it was also a pleasure for me to be on the show.
Yes. Well. Take a look at this now. I'm going to play something, and I want you to react to this. What is going on here? I don't speak Dutch. I think so. What's happening in this video here?
Zoiets. Of componeerde die niet eens op
Die componeerde eigenlijk niet op klavecimbal, want die heeft altijd gezegd aan zijn leerlingen: mannetjes, als je componeert, schrijf aan tafel, leer uw inwendig gehoor ontwikkelen. Je vindt het is kommer en kwel, het is miserie.
Now, what is now? I think I can guess that rhetoric. This is about rhetoric, right? I suppose. So this is a very young Professor Ewald Demeyere, and I assume you're talking about Bach here. So, what are you talking about?
Let me digest this. Let me digest this for a minute. This is a long time ago. No, this was a very it was a very nice man. It was a very nice program. So he interviewed people to speak about music, and here he interviewed me about, if I remember well, about Bach and the way he composed and what he expected from his students, and so. Indeed, we were speaking about rhetorics, but when you speak rhetorics, it's eloquence. Huh? We don't mean the Cicero and Quintilianus rhetorics, of course. And then I've explained a little bit how he composed. So that's funny to see that.
Yeah, you look like
that's actually a fantastic harpsichord, huh?
Oh yeah,
that is an original. That's an original harpsichord. So an original harpsichord from 1747,
Which
is in the Vleeshuis Museum in Antwerp. It's.
Wow.
I've made a recording on this one.
And look at you! You're such a natural on television. This is fantastic. you have, some people just don't look good on television. You look at you. You're just really just fantastic.
You make me blush.
Now, well, it's been such a pleasure to have the great Professor Ewald Demeyere here to explain so many things. I've learned so many things. I thank you so much for the incredible hard work. I know a lot of people are really benefiting from your critical edition. We have some exciting news, right? Would you like to mention your new writing endeavor, that your new blog? We have to talk about your incredible new blog that is really just got so many fantastic articles. I really encourage people to subscribe to the blog or go put it in your RSS feed. Check out the blog articles. Can you talk about your new blog, Essays on Music?
Yes, I had the idea to share actually some thoughts that I have on a variety of topics, and I've started out, for instance, with a number of articles on historical performance practice, and more specifically on inégalité, so on playing rhythmically unequally in French Baroque music. And at the same time, I wanted to share what I know about compositional and improvisational practices in the 18th century, with a lot of attention, obviously, to Naples, to Partimento, but also to the extension of that thought, which is obviously the schema theory, which is basically nothing else than giving a name or recognizing a musical pattern so that it becomes usable as something tangible. And that is an ongoing process. And you see, if you click on outline, that if you go up, you have outline, you have two categories for the moment, so historical informed performance practice, and you have schemata, that when you click on for instance, schemata, that you have actually like an index in a book. It's very easy to find your way around the different articles, much easier than on the home page. But so this is something which is going on, which will be going on for years to come, because it's also an important output of my research.
Fantastic.
And the big advantage of this, of course, is that when you compare that to a scientific article that you write for a certain magazine, I've published, for instance, an article on a schema that I have discovered has been published in 18th century music. The problem is often that it is very hard for people to find it. And there's a second reason I want to do this blog, and that is that I want to make the information usable at the keyboard. Because when you read articles, mine included, they are not immediately meant to that you sit at the keyboard and apply what you know, and apply what is written, sorry. And so my purpose with this blog is that I write not much text, but only the bare essentials, a bit like the regole, you could say, by Fenaroli. But then I give a lot of musical examples, as you can see here, and I always play them. So the example that you see here, I have recorded that example and uploaded it. You can always listen, you can always make that link between notation.
I mean, that is far superior to just a MIDI playback, right? A MIDI playback doesn't have that's better sound.
That is also one of the things that is for me really important. That this kind of collective idea that you link performance practice on a wonderful instrument by a player that is an accomplished musician, and then dealing with improvisation. That there is no barrier in between those things. The pedagogy is so good also that I want to honor it by playing it on a wonderful instrument, and by recording it. I mean, my mic is not of the top quality, but it is decent enough.
Oh, that sounded great. That was awesome.
Yeah,
that was wonderful.
That was wonderful.
And I wanted one final thing I wanted to plug was your incredible YouTube channel. Please, I mean, look at these fantastic. There's tutorials. There's very high quality realizations. So go to his blog, subscribe to his YouTube channel. And really, there's so much great content that Professor Ewald Demeyere is producing. It's really incredible, and I'm a fan, and I'm very happy to have you on the program talking about Partimento. You're one of the best, so there we go. So, Professor,
you make me blush once again.
No. Thank you for doing your incredible work. I mean, people like you. I mean, you specifically really have changed my life, because I can end with maybe one anecdote. I mean, like, I feel like experts in early music analyze music so much faster and better. Let's take that. I remember I spoke to you about a Chopin example maybe a couple of months ago, and it was the Chopin Etude Opus 10 number 1, the big arpeggio one, the big one with arpeggios. And I have a long history with that piece. I first analyzed it with chord symbols, so that tells you how little I knew. So then later on, I was applying figured bass, and then I said, oh, maybe I could ask Professor Demeyere to help me out here. I have a few problems. And then boom, 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 so quick. You looked at the score and said, oh, he's doing this. This is a 19th century composer. You're applying the same principles that you would use in Partimento and in the 18th century so easily in the 19th century. It's like you didn't really do anything different.
No, there is not a point in time where composers say, now I will do. Yes, of course, in the 20th century you've had that, but the things change gradually, and it's always it's a bit of a dogma, but it makes more sense that you take something old to apply to something new than the opposite. When you have a harpsichord, I have several harpsichords at home, and I play a piece by Johann Christian Bach. Will I say I will not play it on a harpsichord
because perhaps it should already be on the pianoforte? No, because the harpsichord still was around, and the harpsichord stayed around until well into the 19th century.
Well, it's here today. It's here today.
And when Johann Christian Bach came in a place where there was no pianoforte, but there was a harpsichord, he would play the harpsichord. That is how they lived their lives. That is the logical approach. I find it much more problematic than you play old music on a newer instrument, because that newer instrument was not around when the composer composed his piece. And that's the same for theoretical approaches. When you try to analyze the things that I have seen with the Roman numerals for those 4 bars are I'm sorry, but are a nightmare, because they do not explain what is happening, because they are a theory which is so much later and that you apply to something which is so much older, and so that it does not make sense, and it is so hard to make people understand this, and it's so hard to get rid of that when you analyze Mozart. I don't like the word analysis. I mean, you told me that when I saw that etude by Chopin, that I was quick. Yeah. But I have to be quick. I'm a harpsichord player. I'm a harpsichord player. I play continuo. I improvise. It is one of those necessities that I have to be quick. And so when looking at the score, you have to be quick in your actions and your reactions. If you want to call that analysis, okay.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something about that training in Basso Continuo, right? It makes you so fast.
Absolutely. When you play Basso Continuo from score, your eyes scan the complete score. Even when the Basso Continuo is figured. When it is not figured, the only way to be absolutely sure what chords to play is that you have scanned the complete score at the moment that you have to play a chord. That's the same thing here. it is such a simple piece, but it looks, or it can look a bit complicated, and it's extremely difficult to play. Don't get me wrong, but musically, it is one of the simplest. Like, it's exactly. It's not for nothing that it is in the same key, of course.
Yeah.
It's a very simple concept, and so you put all the notes, instead of making them horizontal, you put all the notes, or the bass, or each or one note of the chord, you put them vertically, and you have what it is. You have the essence of the piece.
Well, I mean, so insightful, and really, I think that sort of thinking is the kind of thinking we need more of today. I know it's an older style, but it seems to work. So, I mean, let's not throw it out. I'm avoiding the modern stuff. I want to go back to the older stuff because it works. It's just a system that works. And I think people like you, with your incredible research and playing and teaching, are really pushing it in the right direction. And I really wish you will come back again soon. You've really got me excited about instruments now. Now I think we should have an episode on instruments. Maybe we get a panel of harpsichordists to come and trash equal temperament and... No, I'm just kidding. I want to have a panel of harpsichordists talking about the merits of other temperaments. That would be a better way of phrasing it. So that would be a good one.
Count me in.
Well, the great Professor Ewald Demeyere, thank you so much. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.